Did you want to talk religion, or do you just want to talk politics?
See that you're reading my mind. All right. So now, all right. So far, Javier and I have been singing Kumbaya. Now we're going to sing a new song. We're going to see who sings the loudest. That's all. Okay. Yeah, I think the first video I commented on, I said something like, you have too firm of a grasp on reality to be an atheist. And you know what? I believe that. I believe that. Yeah. And I saw your video about atheism and conservatism, how you kind of put those two things together and how you harmonize those two concepts. And you said a few things that I was curious about. You said you were raised as a Christian.
Yes.
You said you read through the Bible like 4 times.
Yes.
Okay. And you just couldn't make sense out of it.
Well, let me clarify. When I made that video, I wasn't specific enough. I was kind of early into YouTube, and, you know, I'm still sharpening my communication skills when it came to YouTube. Mm-hmm. But what I was really saying was I started off very strong as a Christian. When I say strong as a Christian, I meant like if I knew you practiced witchcraft, we had a problem. And I was so in love with God. I wanted to do the best that I could to serve God. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the passage in the Bible that says, seek ye the kingdom of God and all these things shall be added unto you. Mm-hmm. I took it literal. There was a lot of things in the Bible that inspired me that I was hoping that God would allow me to, you know, just a tiny fraction. If I could just, you know, be the best Christian that he could allow me to be. Yeah. And so I started reading. Reading from front to back, from Genesis to Revelations. I never went a day without flipping a page of my Bible, and I wanted to learn. I got with a theologian, and he started breaking down certain concepts and tying it back into ancient Israel, and he started revealing to me the translations on Bada, rock, earth, ground.
Can I ask who that was?
Well, his name was Chaplain Smalls. He was a theologian in Augusta, Georgia. Okay. He taught at Augusta University.
Okay, so it's somebody you knew personally.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
This was not me going to school for it. This was I was actually incarcerated at this moment, and I worked at his detail where I became his like personal secretary, and we spent hours and hours together, and we would just go through the Bible. He would show me all this, and I just kept learning more and more. And then the more that I was learning, I started saying, wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't comport. You know, it was a long journey, but not once did I ever want to be an atheist. That was the last thing that I ever imagined being. I didn't even know what an atheist was. So that's kind of how my journey began into my atheism.
Okay. And so what are some of the things that you feel didn't make sense to the point where you had to actually jettison your belief in God?
Well, we could go down a rabbit hole, but to put it in a general sense, yeah. Okay. So let's try not to get too broad. One of the things that really stuck with me was the very relatable stories from one religion to the other religion, and how a lot of these other religions had very similar concepts, virgin births and resurrections and, you know, things of that sort that really, you know, troubled me. That was one of the first things that really bothered me when I started seeing similarities between religions. And I was like, well, it says that this is unique, but I see this in other works of religion. Now, that doesn't discount that Christianity wasn't true, but it was something that made me stop and question, like, well, how do I know this one is the copy? Or how do I know this one is the original? That was one of the things that really struck me at first.
did you get that information from secondary sources, or did you do primary source research?
Well, at the time, I was reading books of antiquity, so I can't necessarily tell you exactly if it was firsthand or secondhand, but there were collections of antiquity of historical documents put together from different parts of the world: Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, even Hinduism. So I was reading like ancient scriptures that survived that was translated into antiquity books. So
Okay.
I can't tell you if it was firsthand or secondhand.
Okay. Yeah, because I know there's a book. I actually have the book. It's called The Gospel in the Greeks. It's by Ronald Nash. And he destroys that whole narrative about, what's his name? Osiris and, all this
Yes.
Greek mythology is supposed to be what Christianity is based upon. And he just, from a scholarly perspective, he goes into the primary sources and he destroys that. And what you realize after you're done reading that is that, you'll hear this stuff on the internet, and when you read this on one site, you find out that the source for this site was this site over here, and the source for that site was this site over here, and the source for that site was this site over here, until it all comes back to the first site, and it's just this narrative that just keeps going around in a circle, but nobody goes back to the primary source documents.
See, that's the thing that I want to point out. That alone did not really bother me as much. It was just something that started me to question. But that alone would never make me think that Christianity wasn't true.
Okay, that's fair.
Let's get more specific.
Yeah.
In the Bible, God changes throughout the Bible. And if you read Genesis,
it changes in what way?
Off the characteristics of God, what type
so?
of God he is.
Really?
Definitely. Like there are parts in the Bible where it says, God said, let us go down and make man in our image. God walked with man.
Mm-hmm.
There was God sits among the congregation. He judgeth amongst the gods.
Mm-hmm.
In certain instances, God seems more human-like God looked for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was like, where are you? He seems much more human-like. And the further you go into the Bible, he becomes more grander. He becomes more expanded. And you can tell from the blood sacrifices and how it evolved from sacrificing sheep to even to Jesus being the final sacrifice and blood atonement. Mm-hmm. This was a graduate change in the personality of God and what he was like and his characteristics. And it only makes sense that God was changing as the culture and people's understanding of God was changing.
Yes. Yes. Good point. Yeah.
And that bothered me because I don't understand how God can be walking in the garden and looking for Adam and Eve. And yet later on, as you get into the books, God is all knowing. He's all powerful. He's everywhere at all times. It seems like somebody expanded on God because God very much mimicked other gods at that time early on in the Bible, more humanistic.
So you're saying the God in Genesis that used to walk with Adam and Eve in the garden, you don't believe he was omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent?
It doesn't explicitly say so. It doesn't characterize him in any fashion on that way. For instance,
in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's pretty powerful.
But you would also have to explain that every religion has a creation story, some shape, form, or fashion.
Okay.
And if you're going to be God, you better be doing some creating. So that's not a big leap for me. What I will say is, if God knows everything, right? But right. Early on in the Bible, God regrets that he made man. How do you regret something you already know?
Yeah.
You chose to do it knowing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just stupid. Yeah, that's called an anthropomorphism. It's just, it uses anthropomorphic language. It doesn't literally mean God repented or, something caught God off guard. We have to, I mean, just from a common sense perspective, if we're going to give God the credit, the power to create the world, are we going to say that then, something caught this God off guard? Doesn't it make more sense to say, this is probably anthropomorphic language that it's using? I mean, to me, you just have to ask that question. And
yeah,
my answer to the question is obviously this is, the scripture is using anthropomorphisms at that point. And it's talking about God in language that we humans could understand. That's
okay. So let me.
Yeah, I mean, does that make sense at all to you? Is that?
I can understand your perception. I can understand that point of view, and I can't tell you for sure that you're wrong. That's one of the problems that I have in the Bible. It's so much up for interpretation, because I can become a fanatic Christian tomorrow and totally disagree with you and your interpretation of the Bible. It's subjective based on who's reading it and who's interpreting it.
Some things, yeah.
Now, let me point out a simple fact. If you say in that situation, you're saying that it's, what's the word you use?
Anthropomorphism. Yeah, anthropomorphism. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we will also have to apply that same concept to the Tower of Babel. When humans were building the Tower of Babel, and God said, let us go down and confuse man, lest they become like us.
Right.
How do you explain that human beings?
Well, it said lest they be. It said lest they. What God said was we have to confuse their language because they're united, and as long as if they're united, they can achieve anything they want, and so that's why God had to confuse their language at that point.
But this is God. He knew this before they did it.
Sure, He did.
Why not confuse the language from the very beginning? Because
God had a plan. God set history in motion, and then he let history play itself out. What's wrong with that?
All right, so let's go with that example. God knows what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. He put it in His plan to happen. Mm-hmm. So if it's all part of His plan, where does free will come in?
Free will, we all have free will.
But God can't know what you're going to do because it's a part of His plan. And you freely choose to do it because you have to go a part of the plan. Because if you do anything against the plan, then you're saying that God's plan is not unfolding the way He saw it. So there's a contradiction there.
Have you heard of the term compatibilism?
Please explain.
Okay. That means that, yes, excuse me, God does predestine whatever should come to pass. So the fact that we're sitting here talking, we're doing that because it was predestined. Before the foundations of the world, you and I would be talking right now. However, you and I made a free will decision to talk. Okay, so
how do you know?
Well, we know because Scripture says that we have free will, and that we will be held accountable for the decisions that we make on a free will basis.
Well, let me ask you this, Robert. Mm-hmm. Your name's Robert. You're Robert.
Yes.
I'm talking to Robert right now. Am I correct?
You are correct.
If you were not Robert and you was David Smalley, you wouldn't be talking to me right now, because right now I'm talking to Robert. You didn't choose to be Robert. Just like David Smalley didn't choose to be David Smalley.
I'm not following you.
All right, so me and you are only talking right now because you are the guy you are, and I am the guy I am.
Yeah.
And a whole range of scenarios played out to where me and you came across each other's path.
Right.
And naturally, if you were someone else that didn't like talking politics and religion, we wouldn't be talking right now. True. You didn't freely choose to be where you were, hear what I said on the podcast, and it strikes interest in you. Because if you were somebody else, you'd be doing something differently. How is that free will? I know it can get complicated.
all I can say is, I grew up in a certain way. I grew up with certain friends. My friends we all took different paths. Okay. The path that I took led me more into, things of an intellectual nature, theology, philosophy. And so that's why you're talking to me. I could have taken a different, I was into drugs, I was into drinking, I was into all that stuff. I could have went down that road, but I chose to go down the road that would inevitably bring you and I together to have this conversation because we have similar interests.
But why?
Those were based on free will decisions that I made.
Why did you choose that path over the other one?
Theologically speaking, because God predetermined that I would do that before the foundation of the world. Nothing happens outside of his foreordination.
So did you have free will to choose?
I absolutely had free will to choose. Absolutely. That's called compatibilism.
So let me ask you this. If you would have chose the other road, would that still have been in God's plan?
Yes, it would have been in God's plan. And we would have realized it was in God's plan when I made that choice. It's like Sinclair Ferguson once said. He said the way you read God's providence is you don't try and guess what God's going to do 2 steps down the road. The way you read God's providence is the same way you read your Hebrew Bible. I don't know if you know how Hebrew is written. It's written from
yes.
right to left. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the way you read God's providence. You want to know what God's doing? You got to look 2 steps behind you. Then you know what he's doing, but you can't look forward. Okay. So
let me interject real quick. So you basically set up a scenario where you can't lose, because if you would have chose a different path, it's still God's plan. And if you would have chose this path, it's still God's plan. Yeah. How do you argue against that? Like, I could usually do the same exact thing and just change the God. I could say right now, me and you're talking right now because Zeus had it in his plan. You couldn't prove me wrong.
Well, I could prove you wrong by proving that the God of the Bible is the true God, and so that would eliminate Zeus right there.
No, it wouldn't, because I could just say Zeus wanted that Bible to be more accurate.
Zeus wanted the Bible to be more. Can you elaborate a little bit?
The reason that the Bible makes more sense to you, the reason Christianity, Islam, and Judaism is such big in the world is because it's all part of Zeus's plan. Zeus only wants things to happen that he planned, and part of his plan is for this to be happening right now.
Okay.
You can't win against that argument.
Actually, you can, I believe. I have a twofold apologetic method. Okay. Have you ever heard of the minimal facts approach?
Nah, you educating me.
Okay. The minimal facts approach isn't to like set the bar way up here. Like, I have to convince you of all these propositions. Okay. I set the bar as low as I possibly can. Okay. If you just accept these facts, like, 2 or 3 of them, or 3 or 4 of them, the rest of them fall in place. Okay. So definitely. I don't have to convince you of all the, I don't have to convince you of 10 propositions. If I can convince you of just these 4, the other 46 will fall in place.
Yeah. So, for example, if angels exist, then it's only natural that angels would be able to fly. So if you can prove angels exist, then it follows. The rest is logically follows.
Yeah, you're on the right track in thinking that way. Yeah. Okay. So the way I do it is, first of all, I argue for the existence of God. Okay. I argue that there has to be a creator. And I freely admit, even though I was predetermined before the foundation of the world to say this, I still freely admit that I should have done a lot better job than I did when I was on David Smalley's program. But the first thing I do, and I never fail, if I can say that without sounding too braggadocious, but I show that God exists. Okay, first we have to have a God. Okay, once I establish the existence of a creator, of a designer, of an uncaused first cause, a personal uncaused first cause, then I move to the evidence for the resurrection of Christ from the dead. Because if Christ rose from the dead, see, first we have to have a God, because if we don't have a God, we can't have a resurrection. Because dead people just don't get up and rise from the dead 3 days later. It just doesn't happen. You have to have a God. What's that?
But that doesn't logically follow. You will first have to demonstrate that a person can't resurrect without a God. You don't have anything to compare it to.
You don't agree that a dead person just can't get up and walk around after 3 days?
Like me and you spoke earlier, and we brought up the example that 99.9%, it's possible that 0.01% could possibly happen. How do we know that one person didn't defy the laws of nature?
Well, you're the first atheist I ever spoke to who want to even grant that, because most atheists, they say, dead people just don't get up and walk, so you're making my job a little tougher.
Thinker,
Okay. Well, look, okay. So I wouldn't, all right. So maybe with you, I would have to take a different approach. But with 99.9% of the atheists out there, the approach I take is first I establish that we have a God who can facilitate a miracle. And then we move on and we look at the reasons for thinking that God did facilitate a miracle. And if I can show that Jesus rose from the dead, then what that does is that vindicates every claim he made for the 3 years that he walked on the earth, that he is God. He came to reveal the Father to us, that the Old Testament is the divine inspired word of God. And then by extrapolation, the New Testament documents would be the New Testament scriptures. Okay, that's how and well, wait a minute. And let me just say one more thing, because we were talking about how to disprove Zeus. And that's how I would disprove Zeus. Because if I can show that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, there goes Zeus, there goes Thor, there goes Osiris, there goes all of them.
Well, let me make 2 points. The first point is I could easily say Zeus told Jesus to give a different God the credit, because Zeus didn't want to be known. He didn't want people to know he was behind it. You still couldn't prove me wrong.
No, I couldn't. But man, oh man, that is just a tough pill for me to swallow. I'm sorry. I can't, I would have to think that the man who rose from the dead could be trusted in what he told us. That's
the thing. You're an atheist when it comes to every other religion except yours.
I've heard that before. I've heard that before. Right? I'm an atheist. I just have one more God than everybody. Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. But, so you can clearly understand the atheistic position. They're like the same way you feel about Zeus. They're in the same boat when it comes to Christianity or Yahweh.
Yeah, but again, we have to go by probabilities and not mere possibilities. Okay. If we can establish the existence of God, and then if we can establish the resurrection of Christ from the dead, then in all probability, Christianity is true. Now, you're right. I mean, there is that 0.01% chance that, maybe Zeus is orchestrating things in the background that we don't know about. But is there any real solid reason to believe that? And I say absolutely not.
Let me ask you this. If I asked you if there was a teacup orbiting around Jupiter, you wouldn't be able to prove that it is, or you wouldn't be able to prove it's not. But whether or not we know it, it could still be true. So it could be true that Zeus is pulling the strings. Whether or not we know it doesn't change the truth.
I agree. But we all still, as human beings, the way we live our lives is we go by what's probable and not what's possible. In other words, you and I agreed to talk today at 8 o'clock. So if somebody else said to you, "Hey, Javier, you want to go fishing or something?" I don't know what you're into, but you would have said, "No, I agreed to talk with this guy Robert Campanero, and so that's what I'm doing." Okay, because it was more probable that I would honor my agreement to meet with you and talk tonight than it would be that I would just cut out without even saying anything. All right, so you went with what was probable and not with what was possible. And that's the way we do everything.
No, I have to push back, Robert. I have to push back because some guy thought one day, you know what? I would like to put a metal bird in the air where hundreds of people can get on it and fly from one place to the next place. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're talking the 18th century, that ain't possible. But somebody's imagination is being able to envision something that you wouldn't think is possible. Humans deal in the possible all the time. We do it all the time.
I don't think there was anything improbable about believing that someday we could create aircraft that are able to carry hundreds of people across the world. I believe one day we are going to create a time machine. If we're around long enough, I believe we're going to create a time machine. Now, do you have the slightest idea how they're going to do that? I mean, I have an idea of the direction they're going to go in, but I mean, how they're going to do it, I have no idea. But I do know that theoretically it's possible. And so I believe that one day they're going to do it.
You're dealing in the possibilities right there. You're not dealing in the probability. You're dealing in the possibility.
No, I'm dealing with.
Because it could be impossible.
No, it's not impossible. That's the thing.
I say it could be.
It's not though. We do it all the time. We time travel all the time. Anytime you travel forward in space, you travel forward in time. Not enough for it to make any difference. But if you had an atomic clock, in other words, if you took an atomic clock and you put it on a 747 or 777 or whatever, and you flew across the world, okay, and then you looked at that clock and you look at a clock that was on the Earth the whole time, you will see a time difference. The clock that was on the jet aircraft will be, just slightly ahead in time. That's because
time is a concept. Time doesn't really exist.
Time definitely exists. Space and time. Yeah, sure it does. Sure it does.
It's just a concept. If you took off all living beings in the entire universe and you just got rid of them, who would talk about what would time be? Time wouldn't exist. You have to be able to perceive it for it to exist.
So how do you explain the time difference in the two clocks?
Because humans use these measures as a concept to understand the world we live in.
Yeah, but it's measuring something. It has to be measuring something.
Yeah, they're measuring something which we call time. But all they're measuring is change. They're measuring change over a given span of point A to point B. Well, if you remove anybody to measure point A from point B, that it doesn't exist.